Hey guys, it's Reverend Sean, and today we're going to go over aggregates. We're actually going to go over the 5 aggregates, which is just like this. So this is a piece of granite. It's an aggregate. An aggregate is something that is basically a collection of different kinds of things, like mica and some other stone bits in here that make up this stone. It's very hard, it's very compact, and it's just like us because we are 5 aggregates. What are those 5 aggregates? There is form, which is the body, right? And there's feelings, perceptions, mental formations. Form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Now, each one of these is part that makes up the person. Now, it's part of the a couple places you'll see it in Buddhism. One in the Heart Sutra, and the other one is Untitled Sutra, which is the kind of the denial of the Atman. The Atman is, people think it's a soul or kind of like an everlasting essence of being, which we don't find. So this is why Buddhism came up with that part as the Untitled Sutra. And it's the first sutra, or of the first sutras, that the Buddha explained to his 5 little friends that he had when he became an ascetic. Just before he became enlightened, he had these guys that he hung around with, and they went out and practiced. And he said, you know what, I'm not leaving this tree until I figure it out, and even if I die. And he almost did, and you know the story. So when he discovered this, the other 5 ascetics came over to him and said, hey, where you been? What you been up to? He says, this is what I figured out. And he started explaining, the body is not the self, right? If the body were the self, it would not be subject to suffering. It would not be subject to change, okay? Therefore, the body cannot be the self. Because the body is subject to suffering, it is subject to change, right? This makes sense. Then he says, for the feelings are not the self. Now, feelings basically come in 3 flavors, and that's going to be pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings, right? So we've got that. We've got a little bit we can study in through those. Perceptions. Perception is what you receive from like your eye, or your ear, or your nose, or your tongue, or your fingers, right? Those are these, or your mind is a perceiving organ. These are the sense doors, the 6 sense doors, right? So we have like the eyes, 1, the fingers touch, 2, the nose for smell, 3, and the ears for hearing, 4. Did I say the eyes for seeing? I guess whichever one. So it's eye, nose, mouth, hearing. It was 1, 2, 3, 4. Touch, and then the mind. Those are the 6 sense doors. And so those are we receive information from those, and it takes consciousness to receive that. That's the next one right in there. Mental formations is what comes up from that. So it takes consciousness, because I can have an eyeball and I can have an object, but if the object, whatever it is, and the eyeball there's no life there, here actually, then there's no chance of it. We have form, we have no feeling, we have no perception, we have no sense door. We have the sense door, but we have no sense perception. There's no way for it to receive an information or transfer it anywhere in the body. So we do that through the nervous system. This is a good explanation of the way the nervous system works, kind of, for those days. Remember, in previous thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, many times the brain and spinal cord and nerves were considered fat tissue. There's a lot of fat in them, so they were considered marrow, especially like in acupuncture theory. We see that a lot. The brain, the marrow, and the nerves are all considered the spinal cord, because it's inside bone, right? It's considered marrow, so it didn't have that use. So there's a little bit different thinking process. Now we have to translate that thinking process into what we have now, and that's going to give us our idea of the 5 aggregates, right? Now this had to happen under a tree somewhere, 2,500 something years ago, and we have to take it for what it's worth and use that and then build upon that information. Now, it's a format to understand the way the body is, and to understand that, the form is not the self, right? Feelings are not the self. Mental formations are not the self. Perception is not the self. And neither is consciousness. That's not the self. Those are constantly changing. And the Atman was saying, or we were saying with the Atman that is not changing, is like basically you could think of like Sometimes I've heard it explained as the universe itself, which I like that. However, I just try to stick with this Buddhist idea of the anatman, right? There is no soul that transmutates from my body to a next body, because we have no evidence of that, and there's no way to prove it, and there's no way to well, there is a way to prove it, I guess, disprove it, whatever. And people say they have anecdotal evidence to that, but there's nothing really. We don't have memory before that generally, and we don't have memory or thought ahead of that or know where we're going to go. Although in some traditions, the Vajrayana tradition, for example, they will have foresight into that, into their next existence, especially lamas and rinpoches at that level, because once they die, they usually leave a letter and say, hey, I'll be reborn in this area, or by this idea, whatever, my name will be this, yada yada yada. And once they're cremated and stuff, you look for signs, and then they'll go off and hunt for the reincarnation of said deceased lama or rinpoche. But in Theravada Buddhism and most of Mahayana Buddhism, we don't see that. We don't see that at all in Zen. We don't see it in Chan. We don't see it in old Theravada Buddhism either, although they talk about reincarnation or rebirth. Now, we've talked about that before. That has to do moment by moment. And it's just the easier way as a secular Buddhist, or as someone who's trying to be a little bit more scientific about this, to take those as exemplary discussions on this and not critically, what would you call this, strict, thinking that that's the way it is, fundamental thinking on that kind of stuff. Because that's just not the way it is. It's just the way they understood it at the time. So, what are the aggregates? Form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Now, I've always tried to put them in like a circle, like consciousness leads to mental formations, which leads to perceptions, which leads to feelings, which leads to form, or go the other way and say form starts and then you have consciousness with that, and then consciousness will perceive whatever, and then there will be mental formations and feelings, right? I think you could take it that way, I guess. But there's really not. It's just it's like this. They're not lined up specifically in any one way. They're not organized in that kind of sense. They stand alone. They're together all the time, yet we have to describe them separately. They don't lead to each other, is what I should say. And that's kind of a hard thing to grasp, because I wanted to, all the time, being scientific-minded, trying to categorize and organize such things. It was very common to say, like, okay, which one leads to which, or which one develops into the other, or which one feeds the other, or whatever. And it's just try to step away from that and see them as kind of separate things. It's kind of like, if you make a cake, flour and whatever, water and milk and eggs or something like that. Eggs don't make the flour, and they don't create the flour. They don't make the flour possible. They stand alone, but together, when mixed properly under the proper conditions, right? We get into karma again. We end up with a cake. Okay, same thing for you. The forms of feelings, perceptions, mental formations, perceptions, and consciousness all lead up to us as we are in this moment because of conditioning, or conditionality, and karma, which is action and reaction, right? Now, we have to start looking back. Last moment, go back. It had to go back to our parents, had to go back to their parents, etc. Now, you could talk about that as being rebirth, as reincarnation, perhaps, because people think, well, we got to come from somewhere. However, in most of the ideals and ideas of this Buddhist practice, when you start really thinking about this, it has to do with all the conditions of everything that's going on in the universe at the time, who makes it up for now. Now, in order to make this video, for example, I have to be here, you have to be there, you have to be watching, and you have to have electricity, and I have to have electricity, and I have to have the camera and the write-up and the study that I've previously done, and I got here, and all yada yada, and all the things that caused you to be there, and even the thoughts, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness and everything. You had to one day think like, hey, I'd like to learn about Buddhism, and I'd like to learn more about the Four Noble Truths. And I, at one point, had to say, you know what, I need to explain better the Four Noble Truths and a little bit more about Buddhism. So I came up with this channel, and this is all of those things that led up to now. Now, it doesn't mean that I am that information. It just comes through me, basically. I mean, we don't want to get too esoteric about that, but that's what it does. Now, as a practical Buddhist or a secular Buddhist, I don't really like the term secular Buddhist. I like practical Buddhist because we're trying to see it in very scientific terms. And we're trying to understand things in more modern terms. We were trying to take out the esoteric because esoteric was to explain the exoteric, which we did not yet understand. And for that, we'll go over that in a totally different video. But the esoteric teachings, the secret teachings, which there should be none. This is Buddhism. This isn't like rocket surgery or some kind of weird science, and there should be no mysticism in this because it's supposed to be practical for everyday use, and that's what we're trying to do with this. So how do we use this in everyday use? We have to realize, one, that if I can't identify with my body completely, right? And this is a whole thing in meditation practice to do the charnel grounds and the meditations on death and change and getting older and all these kind of things because people get too attached to that and then they suffer because of that. Now, mental formations, same thing. We have to understand that those are changeable and they lead to suffering. And with that, we can see that our minds, which are trainable and changeable, can help us eventually become emancipated from those sufferings, whatever they are. Now, a lot of people are talking more about emancipated from all sufferings and stuff like that. Let's not worry about that yet. Let's start with little things, tiny steps first. Like how do we deal with problems with the body, problems with the consciousness, problems with the mental formations, perceptions, what are the feelings and stuff like that. Now, these are all things that we can see and observe in meditation, and then we can actually evaluate them, whether they are skillful or unskillful, as we develop our wisdom, right, and our understanding of the way our brain works, and we start to see that. You just have to like kind of separate yourself and to be a third-party observer between the object and the observer, and then you, right? It's kind of like a triangular effect kind of thing going on there. Now, with that, when we're studying this kind of stuff, the 5 aggregates, let's go into each one of them and just look at, let's see if I could read these very easily. Form, both body and organ and sense object. For example, the eye, an object, is designed to receive information about light. Heat, sound waves, and chemicals are smell and taste and stuff like that, and hearing, those are vibrations, right? So receive, we have to have this kind of like receiving mechanism, this kind of way to move this stuff all around. The second one is feeling, or vedana, and it's also called sensation sometimes. That's pleasant, those are the three, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. So we can look at different things we see. Do I have a pleasant feeling about that? Am I attached to it? How can I let that go? Am I have an unpleasant feeling about that? How can I let that go? Is it useful? Is it going to help me in some way? Is it going to help out the situation? This takes a lot of like work inside. This is all internal work, man, and this is all stuff that we need to work on as individuals. The third one, perception, is samja, taking the feeling and giving it more attributes. For example, warm, soft, hard, etc. This is a preliminary part of the nervous system's actions. The actions of the nervous system is go, hey, there's something outside of me or outside of this, and I need to do the next step. The next step is mental formations, also called volition, okay, or feelings actually. Feelings and volition they're separate, but they can happen at the same time. Mental formations is samskara, also called volition. A conditioned response to a stimulus, conditioned, notice that. Conscious decision also relates to perception and feelings with the form. So taking all that information, we pull in this information, we have a mental formation or volition. Now, volition means usually like we voluntarily do something about it. We voluntarily are going to act, or we're going to think, or we're going to do something. So there's a decision process in here, and this is a vital part of the nervous system. We know that, right? The nervous system is a receiving mechanism, and then you have a transfer mechanism inside to send things to different parts of the brain where it makes, it realizes the perception and then has feelings about it, and then volition, and then eventually some kind of outcome, okay? And the last one is consciousness, or vijnana. Just having an eye or an ear, an object on them, a sight or sound, still is nothing without consciousness to put it all together. You may even think you can think of it as like sentience, or being alive. Now, what is a sentient being? A sentient being is that which has the ability to have senses, which would be what? Feelings, perceptions, right? It has to have a form. So these are all just like ways to think of the body as changeable and impermanent and subject to that change of suffering. Subject to the want to stay the same. The subject to wanting to be different than it is now. Okay, that's the five aggregates, basically. Well, this is the five aggregates too. This is just aggregate. This is granite. Anyway, this is Reverend Sean over at the Center Path. Don't forget to subscribe at the bottom, and you can hit the bell and find out when I'm going to do more stuff. This is actually part of our cheat sheet, which I don't know where I put my last copy of it, but I have it on the website, the centeredpath.org, right down through here. And you can go on there and look under downloads, and there'll be a 2-page cheat sheet on the basics of Buddhism, and you can follow through and then look up each of the different videos that we've done on each of those subjects and the write-ups that I've done on the blog, which is all connected in through that site and stuff like that. So anyway, this is Reverend Sean over the Center Path. I want you guys to take care of yourselves and do your meditations and do your study and relax. Life is good. Take care.